Precautionary measures, what can people do at least to minimize the impact of that mid-latitude cyclone? So we must be able to mention all those things. And then data response questions are in the form of maps, extracts, case study, graphical statistics, infograph. So everything is based on that. So that they ask questions based on a map, extract, case studies, and also in the infograph. So must be able to do that. And then another thing in terms of the data response questions, most of our learners are using, they are answering all the questions using maybe, for example, a case study. So not all answers are in the case study. So remember, the case study is only reminding you that what are we talking about here. So unless if the question says code from the case study, then we will be able to code from the case study. But most of the answers must come from you based on the knowledge that we are having of geography, nothing else. So most of the learners that are using that case study to answer questions, then it's going to be difficult for them to pass this particular paper if then they are not having that geographical background or the information itself. So we are not using any case study to answer questions. But unless if a question says you must code from the extract or code from the case study, then we'll be able to code from the case study or provide an evidence from the infograph, then we'll be able to provide an evidence from the infograph. And then the next one is tropical cyclone, general characteristics also, which are very important. So remember, one of the general characteristics of tropical cyclone, remember they form between, they occur or form between 5 degrees and 30 degrees north and south of the equator. That is one. And the general direction of that tropical cyclone, remember they move from east to west. So these are some of the general characteristics of the tropical cyclone. And in the area where tropical cyclone is formed, factors necessary for their formation. So what makes this tropical cyclone to be stronger or to develop? So it's very important also. You can't go to the examination without knowing these factors necessary for their formation. Because now every time they will ask a question, say name or discuss or describe the factors necessary for the formation of this type of tropical cyclone. Stages of development and associated weather conditions. So remember, the tropical cyclones are developed, basically they occur in tropics where there's hot conditions as compared to mid-latitude cyclone. So that means now, in terms of the stages, the pressure must be low so that the tropical cyclone can develop. And then also the associated weather conditions, they will be different from those ones that are mid-latitude cyclone. That means I'm saying to you learners, in order for you to understand these two cyclones, you must compare them. Because the other one is developing on the west, the other one is developing on the east. So we must be able to compare the two cyclones so that we can be able to have a clear understanding of these cyclones. Reading and interpreting satellite and synoptic weather map. So we must be able to interpret the satellite image, synoptic weather map based on a tropical cyclone. Case study on one recent tropical cyclone. You must know the impact and also strategies that help to manage the effects. So, which is very important. Like I said, in terms of mid-latitude cyclone, then you must be able to know the impacts. So you can't go inside the examination without knowing the impact of a tropical cyclone and also the strategies or precautionary measures on how to solve a tropical cyclone or to minimize the impact of a tropical cyclone. Now, the other thing in terms of tropical cyclone, we're having two categories of countries here. We're having developed countries and also developing countries. Those two countries are not able to handle the effects of tropical cyclone the same way. Because the other one is rich, the other one is poor. So that means we must be able to provide us or give out or explain why developing countries it's going to take long for them to to recover from the impacts of a tropical cyclone as compared to maybe a rich country, which is a developed country, in terms of resources, obviously. So must know that also, which is very important. Subtropical anticyclones, the location of the three high pressure cells, your Kalahari at the interior, your South Atlantic on the western side, and then your South Indian on the eastern side. So you must know those three pressure cells. Now, remember, in those three pressure cells, you must be able to explain how do those three pressure cells influence the temperature of South Africa. It's either during winter or also during summer. So must be able to draw a sketch just to show during winter they affect South Africa this way. This one is dominated in Kalahari pressure, for example, is dominated in interior. Then obviously that warm moist air from Indian Ocean won't be able to enter into the interior. So that sketch, that diagram or that drawing, you must be able to draw us that sketch so that we'll be able to explain or how these three cells affect or influence the temperature of South Africa. General characteristics, the influence on the weather and climate. General characteristics, because remember, when we're talking about anticyclones, we're talking about high pressure. So what is the general characteristic of high pressure? High pressure is a cold air, and cold air sinks. So those are one or two characteristics that we can mention there. The rotation of that anticyclone obviously will be anti-clockwise rotation when it subsides into the surface. So that means you must be able to explain that. Like if you look at your trial examination, it was also there was also a question where they ask you about the general characteristics of a Kalahari high pressure. So must be able to explain to us those general characteristics. And then anticyclones, circulation and associated disturbance, your moisture front, your land thunderstorm, coastal low pressure, South African berg winds. So these are traveling disturbances that one must also know, and also know how to define each. So that means when you're talking about moisture front, you must be able to define what is a moisture front, what is a land thunderstorm, coastal low pressure, and then also the berg winds, South African berg winds. You must be able to explain to us or define what is South African berg winds. So which is very important. So remember, in geography, you must know all the concepts so that you can be able to approach any question in geography. And then reading and interpreting satellite and synoptic weather map, which is very important. One must be able to interpret, because now, remember what we said earlier. We said our questions in geography on paper one are based on satellite images, synoptic weather map, sometimes also based on the extract and the case study. So must be able to use that information there and then be able to answer questions based on anything that they are asking you there. And then valley climate and urban climate. So that means we have a microclimate of the valleys, the effects of the slope aspect. So what is the slope aspect? Then we are saying the direction in which a slope faces. North-facing slope, it receives direct sunlight from the sun as compared to south-facing slope. South-facing slope is a shadow zone. That means it receives less or indirect sunlight from the sun. Development of anabatic and also katabatic wind. So one must be able to know the development, how are these two winds developed, especially if you look at katabatic wind. That is where we'll start by talking about terrestrial radiation, and then the air will sink down the valley. It becomes cold and sinks inside the valley, and then immediately when it sinks inside the valley, it forces that warm air at the valley floor to rise. And then because now outside is cold, that warm air won't be able to escape the valley. So immediately when that air is not able to escape the valley, it will only settle at the mid-slope. That is where we'll say it's a thermal belt. So that is the development of this katabatic wind. Anabatic wind, it's a rising air inside the valley. Immediately when that air rises inside the valley, then we say it's also an anabatic wind. So that means one must be able to explain the development of anabatic, must be able to explain the development of katabatic wind. And then the reason for difference between between rural and urban climate, that is when I will talk about urban heat island. So must be able to define what is the urban heat island, why the temperature of urban area is warmer than the surrounding rural areas. So must be able to give us what causes that, what causes the temperature of urban to be warmer than the one in a rural area. So one must be able to give out reasons. So in terms of this topic, every time when it has been asked in a question paper, it's always straight to the point. So that is where now most of our learners will score marks here, maximum marks in terms of this question, if only they study it correctly and understand it. And then pollution dome also during the day and during the night. Must be able to draw the pollution dome during the day and also during the night. So that you can look at the difference between the night pollution or pollutants and also a day pollutant. And then the other one is a strategy to reduce the heat island effect. So must be able to provide us with the strategies on how to reduce that. And also the impact, how this urban heat island will affect people's lives in an urban area. So must be able to give us that strategies and also the impact on people specifically. That is where they will ask that particular question. So strategies to reduce is very important and must be able to give us strategies on how to reduce urban heat island. And then question 2. That means we are done with question 1. Question 1 is out of 60, which is climate and weather. That means if you follow everything that I'm saying you must follow here, you'll be able to get maximum marks there in terms of that particular question, which is question 1, climatology. Climatology is only talking about air. It's either it's a cold air or it's a warm air. When it rises, it condenses. When it subsides, it does not condense. So that is how you'll be able to understand the content of climatology, because we're talking about only air, nothing else but air. Now for question 2 is geomorphology, which is also 60 marks. Geomorphology talk about only water, nothing else but water. How is that particular water going to form or develop landforms when it flows from the source up until the mouth or up until it enters the ocean? And then the first thing that we must know is the drainage systems in South Africa. That is where the concepts feature in there. So must be able to give us the concepts here of drainage basin or drainage systems. So we're having many concepts here. That means I'm saying to you, in terms of geomorphology, it is based on concepts. One must be able to understand the concepts of geomorphology so that can be able to explain the processes behind those concepts. Because now if you don't know the concepts of geomorphology, then you won't be able to answer any question in relation to geomorphology. Geomorphology is based more on concepts, grade 12. So if you don't study your concepts properly, then you won't be able to answer any question, because after each and every concept, there's a process. So we won't be able to answer anything. Now, fluvial processes must be able to also to analyze and explain those different fluvial processes. But if you look at bullet number 4, the important concepts, one is drainage basin, catchment area, river system, watershed, tributary, source, mouth, confluence, drainage density. There are so many concepts there in geomorphology. I just mentioned only these ones, because now they feature mostly in the drainage basin. But in most cases, geomorphology is based on only concepts. I'm repeating it again, grade 12. For geomorphology, you must know the concepts. You must know your concepts. Because if you don't know your concept, then you won't be able to answer anything, because after each and every concept, there is a process. Now, in terms of bullet number 2, let's go back to the bullet number 2, fluvial processes. So we're having so many fluvial processes. Remember, we have to understand for example, you have to understand longitudinal profile of the river. Longitudinal profile you must be able to understand that profile. You must be able to define what is a longitudinal profile and then also what is a transverse profile, just to differentiate between those two profiles. In terms of longitudinal profile, remember, it's having those stages: upper course, middle course, and the lower course. And then most of these fluid processes that are happening at the lower course. So that means you must be able to know your delta, your braided stream, the processes behind each is delta, braided streams, floodplains, levees. So all those processes that are happening at the lower course, then you must be able to explain each and every feature that is developing at the lower course there. So you must know that. Catchment and river management. Now, in terms of catchment and river management, most of the time, this question, when they ask the question itself, is based on a case study. Maybe they'll give you a case study or give you a picture. Then must be able to answer questions based on the, it's either about they give you a picture or a case study. Now, one also must know, in terms of catchment and river management, how do you manage our rivers? Where do we get water first? What are you using water for? And how are we polluting our rivers or our catchment areas? And then how do you be able to manage that? So must be able to give us that strategies on how to manage or minimize the way in which people are polluting our catchments or river itself. And then the learners are expected to be concept rich and content rich. So I said it before, and then now, if you don't know that, then you won't be able to answer anything here. You must be rich in terms of concepts and also content. Because now, if you are not rich, you won't be able to answer anything. We must prepare ourselves accordingly so that we can be able to answer any question here. Discharge of a river, we're having laminar flow and also turbulent flow. Laminar flow, the riverbed is even, and also turbulent flow is uneven. Types of rivers, must know that also. We're having 4 types of rivers. It's permanent, periodic, episodic river, and exotic river. So we must be able to distinguish between those types of rivers. And also, the most important thing in terms of types of rivers, remember, we're having water table. So it's either the water table, you must know the water table during dry season, and also water table during wet season. So that you can be able to check the flow of that particular river. Drainage patterns. Drainage patterns, dear learners, in terms of drainage patterns, in most of the time, you see, this question, you must know the characteristics of this, the appearance first, né? The appearance of each pattern. If you are saying it's a dendritic pattern, then you must be able to look at the appearance. And then also must know the characteristics of each. You also must know, the last one must know the underlying structure, which is very important. In other question papers, when they are asking this particular question, might be asking the 15-mark question, or also in the short objective questions. Short objective questions, maybe they will put column A, column B, and then they will give you those drainage patterns. Or they will give you multiple choice type of questions then in terms of short objective questions based on drainage patterns. So one must understand the characteristics and then also underlying rock, which is very important. Drainage density. Now, for example, grade 12, in terms of drainage density, most of the time they'll give you 2 structures or two drainage basins. The other one is having less streams. The other one is having more streams. And then questions will be based on that. Why this one is having more streams? Why this one is not having more streams? So remember, we're having about 5 factors that influence infiltration, runoff, and drainage density. So one must be able to understand that when you are being asked in terms of drainage density. Stream order of a topographic map, for example, one must be able to to give out the definition for stream order, and then also be able to give us the stream order of a drainage basin in terms of that content. And then fluid processes, river profiles, we're having across and longitudinal profile, stages of a river. I've talked about that. Fluvial landforms, meanders, oxbow lake, braded stream, floodplains, natural levees, waterfall, rapids, and also delta. So these are very important fluvial landforms, especially they are formed at the lower course of the profile itself of the river. And then river grading. In terms of river grading, we're having graded and ungraded profile. One must be able to explain why this river is graded and then why this river is ungraded. And then also, one must be able to explain the process that must be taken, that must take place whether before a river can be graded or be ungraded. So those processes, the one must be able to explain that. And then river rejuvenation, the concept is very important there. One must be able to know the concept of river rejuvenation first, and then must also know the factors that influence river rejuvenation. Why do we have river rejuvenation? What causes river rejuvenation? So must be able to give us those facts and then features that are being developed because of river being rejuvenated. So must be able to explain to us how are those features formed. And then river capture, which is stream piracy. Definition is very important also there in terms of river capture. And then you must know also the two concepts that are also very important in addition. You must know headward erosion. You must also know abstraction, which is very important. Those two concepts are also very important, including also river capture, which is very important, or stream piracy. And then in the same stream piracy or river capture, you must know features that are formed because of river being captured, and then five features to must be able to explain each on how it's been formed. And then the other one, the impact on the misfit stream. How does it's going to affect people that are staying close to that particular river? And then the other side also, that is basically the capture stream. How is going to affect the production in that particular area? So one must be able to distinguish between maybe capture stream and misfit stream. A capture stream is a river that stole the water of another river, and then misfit stream is that part where water is not longer going that side. So must be able to explain what's going to happen to the community around, what's going to happen to farming, and then also what's going to happen to a domestic use of water around the area. And then the other side, then water, there will be enough water because now that river has stolen the water from the other side. And then we're having superimposed and antecedent streams, which are also very important, two concepts. Then one must be able to explain or differentiate between super and antecedent stream patterns, which is very important. And then catchment and river management, the importance of managing drainage basins and catchment areas. Why is it important for all of us to manage drainage basins and catchment areas? So the impact of people on drainage basins and catchment areas. So that means in terms of the impacts, we're basically talking about how are people affecting or polluting water. And then in most of the time, this question will be asked based on a case study, like I said before. Then one must be able to explain the strategies on how to reduce the impact that people are having in terms of polluting our drainage basins and catchment areas. So it's very important for you grade 12s to understand the concept of river management in terms of catchment and river management. River management must be able to define to us what is the river management. You must know the importance of using water. You must know the impact of people on drainage basin. You must know the strategies on how to solve that impact. And then section B, which is map skills and techniques, which is very important also, which is the last question. So the first part of the question, it's a calculations. Like for example, I've made examples there, magnetic declination, area, gradient, but we're having many calculations. So one must be able to know how to calculate each and every one of those calculations given there. So if you are saying magnetic declination, you must be able to calculate what is a magnetic declination. If you are saying area, one must be able to calculate what is an area. Gradient, one must be able to calculate what's gradient. Vertical exaggeration, one must be able to calculate vertical exaggeration, which is very important. And then the other one is a map interpretation. So in terms of map interpretation, for example, grade 12's map interpretation is based only on the content in paper 1. For example, we're talking about climate and weather and geomorphology. So that means in terms of map interpretation, we'll be only focusing on that, nothing else. So slope aspect is possible for you. You must be able to know the direction in which the slope faces. For example, if you go inside the map, based on the contour lines, you look at those contour lines, then you'll be able to check whether the slope is facing north or is it facing south. And then it's receiving more sunlight or is receiving less sunlight. So that means slope is one of the things that may also be asked in terms of the interpretation. Varied climate, the impacts of varied climate on people by looking at katabatic wind, by looking at anabatic wind. So one must be able to explain the impacts of varied climate on people around. And then drainage basins. So in terms of drainage basins, there are so many things that might be asked there. Your upper course, your lower course, for example. Or maybe also those concepts based on the drainage basins. One must be able to explain all those concepts based on drainage basins. Drainage patterns, because now there's perennial and non-perennial waters inside each and every topographical map. So it's most of the time this question will be there in the question paper, and one must be able to explain or identify the drainage patterns that you see in certain block or inside the map, and then be able to give out the characteristic and also be able to give us also the underlying rock of each. Stream order, by looking at the flow of the river or the streams or the patterns, then must be able to give us the stream order. Is this stream order number 2, stream order number 3? Then will be as such in terms of the map interpretation. Fluvial landforms, upper course, lower course, meandering. Is the river meandering here? Then you must be able to identify that inside that. So these are some of the examples of map interpretation inside the map. So grade 12s, you must be able to interpret, because I know most of our learners are suffering or they're struggling in terms of map interpretation. Map interpretation is based on the content of that particular paper. If we are doing climate and weather and geomorphology, it is based on climate and weather and geomorphology only. So it's only 12 marks. So if you already studied slope aspect, for example, in terms of in your preparation for this paper, then you are covered when they ask this question in the map interpretation. It's the same thing, same content, same everything. So let us not panic in terms of map interpretation. I know most of our learners are panicking, are saying, no, they don't know how to interpret the map. But map interpretation is based on the content covered in that particular paper. So let's make sure that we prepare accordingly by looking at your content in geography or in climate and weather and geomorphology. Then we'll be able to answer the map interpretation, which is basically 12 marks. And then the last part is GIS. GIS is having so many concepts. One must be able to define what is a geographical information system, and other concepts that follow. The components must be able to give us those components. And then also must be able to differentiate, for example, between attribute data and spatial data. One must be able to differentiate between a vector data and a raster data. One must be able maybe to define what is a data layering, which is very important. So I mentioned just a few in terms of the concepts. So make sure that you cover all the concepts, because now we don't know which concepts are going to ask for paper 1. So read all the concepts there. Then you'll be able to answer correctly. So in general, in terms of paper 1, especially question 3, most of our learners are not doing well in terms of this paper question, to be precise. So this question 3, 30 marks, we find that most of our learners are getting less than 30% in terms of this particular question. So let's prepare accordingly, grade 12. Know your calculations, know how to interpret the map, and also know your GIS concepts, which are very important. Let's make sure that we ask questions in your school, ask your teachers, help you how to do your calculations, your map interpretation, and also a different concept of GIS. That is the only way to make you understand that. Or your peers, if there is anyone around you, grade 12s, please make sure that you help each other in terms of calculations, in terms of interpretation, in terms of GIS. Because there are some other learners also, even though there are few learners that are doing well as compared to those ones that are not doing well. So, in conclusion of my presentation today, I just want to say to geography learners that are writing on the 15th, that the beginner is not the owner, but the finisher. And then also a joy lies with the finisher, not the beginner. So this is not, basically we are saying this is not how you start, it's how you end. So this is the only moment that is left for you, so that you can be able to do your best in geography. Geography is everything. So everything that is happening outside is geography. So let's help each other and raise the bar so that all of us can be able to achieve what we want at the end of the year. And then MTN is giving out cap and T-shirt. And then I'm going to give you a question, grade 12s, just to show you whether you were listening. The question that I'm having here is discuss the change in weather patterns in an area as the mid-latitude cyclone passes. So what are the changes in weather patterns as the mid-latitude cyclone is passing by? So if you can give me 4 of those maybe and discuss them, then we'll get your cap and the T-shirt. But to answer all these questions, you must go to Free State Department of Education. Go to Free State Department of Education Facebook page. Then be able to answer that particular question. And then we'll get your MTN cap and the T-shirt. Grade 12s, Rayetsa and Twena on the 15th. Let's not hesitate. Let's not panic. On the 15th, we are doing this thing. Rayetsa and Twena. It's our time now. On the 15th, we are doing it. We are getting 100% as a province in geography. Thank you. Enjoy, and then good luck on the 15th. All the best. Thank you.